What's going on, guys? Welcome to the Anthony Bruno Show. I am Anthony Bruno. Major League Baseball and the Players Association went back and forth in negotiations what seemed like a million times. Proposals were being rejected left, right, and center. It was flat out embarrassing to watch them nearly screw it all up. But in the end, they finally settled on an agreement, and we have a 60-game MLB regular season. It's going to be a sprint to the finish, and today I'm going to discuss the Toronto Blue Jays and what to expect from them this season. So let's go. Before we get to the baseball talk, I just want to mention that this episode is brought to you by R&D Custom Woodworking. My good friend Daniel built me this amazing custom sign for the Anthony Bruno Show. It has a beautiful wood finish, epoxy in the middle, and my favorite part, the lights. There's a link in the description to his website, rdwoodworking.ca. He's got some awesome stuff, so go check it out. But right now, let's get back to baseball. Sorry to ruin the positive vibes right off the start, but the Blue Jays are currently in the middle of a rebuild, as I'm sure you know if you've been following the team recently, so don't expect them to magically make a deep playoff run this year. Depending on where you look, the Jays are currently projected to win about 28 games this year, which means that Vegas thinks they're going to finish under 500 and miss the playoffs. Not a surprise. The Blue Jays have finished fourth in the AL East 3 years in a row, and it looks like they're headed for a similar outcome this season. Baseball is usually a marathon with 162 games, but this season is a flat-out Usain Bolt sprint to the finish. And playing a 60-game regular season in the middle of a global pandemic has never been done before, so things might get crazy when baseball starts back up on July 23rd. First, let's take a look at the Blue Jays offense. Last season, the Jays had the 8th worst offense in Major League Baseball in terms of runs scored, but last season was all about the rookies getting their first taste of big league baseball, so their offensive struggles were expected for the most part. But the Jays did hit a lot of home runs last season, but they also finished dead last in batting average and struck out a lot. Management didn't go out in the offseason and get any big-time veteran hitters to complement the young guys, so the team is obviously hoping for internal improvement from the young core players like Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Cavan Biggio, and Lourdes Gurriel Jr. This team is now theirs, and they're going to get a chance to run with it. But I should also mention Austin Martin, who the Blue Jays just drafted 5th overall out of Vanderbilt in the 2020 MLB draft. He looks incredible, but he's still probably a couple years away from the major leagues, so he's another great young position player to look forward to. I've talked about this in a previous video, but if the Blue Jays want to progress quickly through this rebuild and take the next step, they are going to need Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to improve and become the great hitter we all know he can be. Because he was one of the most hyped offensive prospects over the last decade and tore through the minor leagues, but his rookie season was a letdown. He hit just 15 home runs with a .272 batting average and a .772 OPS. There's no other way to put it. It was a very average season considering the big expectations on this kid. But I fully expect Vlad Jr. to bounce back and have a great sophomore season and eventually become the franchise player we all expect him to become. And on the other hand, Bo Bichette only played 46 games last season, but he was unreal, and it was so cool to see because unlike Guerrero, there weren't massive expectations on Bichette. We all expected him to be a solid player, but he flashed superstar potential last season and showed that he has the ability to be a franchise player himself. After those two guys, there's Cavan Biggio, who had a very solid rookie season. He led the team in on-base percentage and stolen bases and showed some pop as well, hitting 16 home runs. So I'm expecting him to improve this season as well and become a very important part of the team moving forward. Everyone loves to talk about the three young studs, but don't forget about Lourdes Gurriel Jr., who was pretty much the Blue Jays' best hitter last season. He's a little older than the other three guys, but he's still only 26 years old. He only played 84 games last season after dealing with injuries and getting sent down to the minors, but he still hit 20 home runs, had 50 RBIs, and a great .869 OPS. So it will be very interesting to see how he performs this season, and if he can continue to hit like he did in 2019, it is going to do wonders for the depth of the Blue Jays lineup. We don't really need to talk about some of the other veterans like Randall Grichuk, Teoscar Hernandez, Travis Shaw, or Joe Panik, because the Blue Jays are only going to go as far as the young guys take them this season, and I actually think the Jays offense can get hot over this 60-game season and take a big leap, but unfortunately, the pitching staff just isn't quite there yet. Speaking of the Jays pitching staff, it ranked 21st in ERA last season and issued the third most walks of any team in baseball. They also had a tough time striking guys out, finishing 7th worst in that category. So obviously there was some major room for improvement. And guess what? The Blue Jays actually spent some money in the offseason, signing Hyun-jin Ryu to a 4-year, $80 million contract. The Jays needed a pitcher like Ryu so badly, and he was awesome last season for the Dodgers, leading the majors in ERA. So he's going to give the Jays a legit frontline starting pitcher, and he should start around 12 games this season, giving the Jays a pretty good chance to win most of those games. But outside of Ryu, it doesn't look too great, with veteran pitchers like Tanner Roark, Matt Shoemaker, and Chase Anderson holding down the fort, waiting for the young Blue Jays pitching prospects to work their way up the system and get to the major leagues. The Jays also signed pitcher Shun Yamaguchi, who's coming over from Japan, but it remains to be seen how he's going to adapt to the major leagues. And outside of closer Ken Giles, who had an excellent season last year and has proven to be a very good reliever at the major league level, when it comes to the rest of the bullpen, it's anyone's guess in terms of how it's going to perform this season. The biggest X factor this season when it comes to the pitching staff is Nate Pearson. He's the #1 prospect in the Blue Jays organization and a top 10 prospect in all of baseball. He looked incredible in spring training this year, pitching 7 innings, giving up just 2 hits, 1 run, and striking out 11. He was also hitting 100 miles an hour on the gun and looks like an absolute superstar who could be the ace of the staff for a long time. But it remains to be seen how the Blue Jays intend on using Pearson this season. So the Blue Jays pitching staff should look pretty damn good in a few years, with players like Alek Manoah and Simeon Woods Richardson still working their way through the system, but don't expect too much from the Blue Jays pitching staff just yet. Now it's time to talk about the Blue Jays schedule, and it is very tough. They're going to play all their games against the AL East and the NL East. They're going to play 10 games against each team in their division. That makes up 40 games. And then they're going to play the remaining 20 games against the NL East. So the Jays aren't going to get a chance to take advantage of the weak AL Central and some of the other bad teams in the American League. Instead, the Jays have to face the Yankees, Red Sox, and Rays, and then they have to take on the defending champion Nationals, the Braves, the Mets, and the Phillies. The Orioles and Marlins are terrible, but 7 of the 9 teams the Jays have to face all have playoff potential, so Toronto is going to have to earn its wins all season long. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the Jays' young hitters rise to the challenge, because the NL East has some of the best pitchers in all of baseball. Max Scherzer, Steven Strasburg, Jacob deGrom, Aaron Nola, and Mike Soroka, so the Jays hitters better be ready. Every team is playing 102 less games than usual this season, so if you get off to a slow start after the first month, there's no time to make up for it later in the year. You are done. So it is imperative to get off to a strong start this season if you want to make the playoffs. And I expect most of the top teams to make the postseason, like the Yankees, Dodgers, Astros, and Braves. And you know what? I'm not really expecting too much craziness. And I know COVID-19 can throw a wrench into everything, but when you look at last season in 2019, of the 10 teams that were in a playoff spot after the first 60 games, 7 of those 10 teams went on to make the postseason after the full 162 games. And in 2018, of the 10 teams that were in a playoff spot after the first 60 games, once again, 7 of those 10 teams went on to make the playoffs after the full 162 game schedule. It's only a 2-year sample size, and I'm sure that previous years will show similar results, but it just goes to show that if you're holding down a playoff spot after the first 60 games, chances are you're going to make the postseason. And if you're not holding down a playoff spot after the first 60 games, chances are you're probably not going to make the postseason. So overall, it means that typically we get a pretty clear picture of who the best teams are after 60 games, so don't expect some terrible team to get hot and make the postseason over the Yankees, Dodgers, Astros, or Braves. For some final thoughts on the Jays, I think they have some great young hitters who will be looking to take a big leap forward this year, but there's still too many factors working against this team to compete this year. They're still in the process of a rebuild. The pitching staff isn't very good yet, and the Jays have a very tough schedule this year against the AL East and the NL East. So I think that Vegas is pretty spot on, projecting the Blue Jays to win about 28 games this year and miss the postseason for the 4th year in a row. I also want to talk about one of the teams I'm very excited to watch this season, and that team is the LA Angels. And here's why. Mike Trout, the best player in baseball, finally has some legit talent around him. Two-way stud Shohei Ohtani has recovered from Tommy John surgery, so he's going to pitch again this season and should continue putting up big numbers at the plate, just like he did over his first 2 years in the major leagues. The pitching staff still isn't great, but the Angels signed Anthony Rendon in the offseason, and in my opinion, Rendon immediately becomes the best position player Trout has ever played with. And this is wild when it comes to Mike Trout. He's played 8 seasons in the majors, won 3 MVPs, and made it to the playoffs just one time. And that one time the Angels got swept. So one of the greatest baseball players of all time has yet to win a playoff game. It's absolutely insane. So I'm hoping the Angels play well this season and we finally get a chance to see Trout do some damage in the playoffs. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. Let me know how you think the Blue Jays are going to perform in this short 60-game season, some other teams you're excited to watch this year, and which team you think is going to win the World Series. I can't wait for baseball to start. It's going to be an awesome sprint to the finish. And as always, I would really appreciate it if you like the video, share it on social media, and subscribe to my channel, especially if you're a sports fan and want to see more content like this. It would really help me out. So that does it for this video, and I will see you guys next time.